Hi everyone, it's Monica and welcome back to Tailor Made Cards for You. Well, as promised, I'm back with another one of the Tim Holtz Stampers Anonymous stamps that was released this Halloween season. And the stamp set that I'm working with is Renaissance. Now, there were several stamps this year that I love, but typically I only buy about 2 or 3 when they're first released, and then I just try to get them later on for my collection. But when I saw this one, I knew it would be a great background. It is so detailed. It has a lot of very intricate lines and shapes, and I thought it would just be perfect to create some sort of a gothic background, not only for Halloween, but I think it would be great for Christmas as well, especially if you think about some of the churches that are out over in Europe. That's kind of like the feel that you get for this stamp set. So when I saw it, I knew that it would be a great stamp set to add to my collection. So that's what we're going to be working with today. Now, my idea is to work with embossing ink, because I want to create some sort of a resist, and then I'm going to add ink to my card. So that's the first thing I want to do. I want to go ahead and I want to stamp it, and then I want to add some clear embossing powder, so that way I can create a resist when I add my ink. So I know I want my card to be vertical and not horizontal. I'm not going to use the entire image. So I went ahead and I took out that foam piece that's on the MISTI, because it is a thicker stamp set. And I'm going to go ahead and just add it to my paper here. Now, I know I'm going to be cutting some of this off, so I'm not too worried about it not getting the entire image. Really, I want this to be my focal point for my card. So I'm going to go ahead and ink this up. And the embossing ink that I'm using is from scrapbook.com, but you could probably use any type of ink. I don't emboss very often, so I just wanted to make sure that my ink is still wet. I would anticipate you could probably use the daubers as well that come from Ranger. Whatever you have in your stash would work perfect. So I'm going to go ahead and just make sure I have a good amount of embossing ink, because I want to make sure that I get a good resist. And then I'm going to go ahead and just using my platform, I'm going to make sure I get some nice pressure down on my cardstock. Now, because I am going to go with a resist, even if I don't get a perfect stamped image with my embossing ink, not too worried about it, because I do like for it to look organic, and it doesn't necessarily have to be perfect. I mean, just looking at this stamp set, you can tell the way that it's cut. It's not intended to be a perfect image, so just do the best that you can. And I don't know if you can see, but there's quite a lot of ink on this, so I think I'm going to be in good shape. All right, so I'm going to put this aside, and then I'm going to go ahead and add some of my clear embossing powder. And this can create a little bit of a mess, so I'm going to go ahead and just make sure I have something underneath so I can go ahead and get this added. Now, you can definitely just pour this out, but I don't have a lot of embossing powder left. I mean, I have enough to work with, but I want to go ahead and see if I can kind of control where my powder is going to go here. I just don't want it to go all over the place. I'm going to get enough on my cardstock so that way I can move it around. And this is going to create our resist, so when we heat emboss it and add our ink, we'll have a nice resist. Alright, so I went ahead and I added my embossing powder, and now I'm just going to go ahead and dry it up. Okay, so the color that I want to use for my background is pumice stone, and then I'm also going to come in with some black soot. Now, I reuse some of my applicators, and as you can see, there is some blue on here, but what I do is I just make sure that I get most of the ink off so that way I don't contaminate. I mean, I don't mind if a little bit of ink goes in, but that's just the way that I work. I don't necessarily have a dauber for every single color, so I just try to work with what I have, and as you can see, I'm not contaminating it at all. So what I typically will do is I'll just find something and get off all the excess ink before I start working into another color. Alright, so now that I have my color on my dauber, I'm just going to go ahead and just start working it in, and the resist should of course not add any color where you've embossed. So I'm going to just go ahead and just work through this. Okay, so once I have all of my ink over my image, I'm going to go ahead and take a rag or a paper towel, and I'm going to remove that ink from the image. And with the emboss resist, it should come up really nicely. Really what you want that to do is to bring the white out. And while pumice stone is very slight, you can still see that image on the background. But I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add darker ink, which is my black soot, just to make sure that my background will show up really nicely. So I'm going to go ahead and get my distress ink, and I'm going to be working with black soot, and I'm just going to slightly add it over my embossed image, because I don't want to necessarily cover the whole thing, but I just want to add to it so that way the white will kind of jump out. Now, I don't know if you can see here on my distress oxide, I have some little dots on my ink. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to tell you a story about that while I add my black soot to my paper. One thing you want to be really careful of is not to commingle or co-mix your distress oxides and your distress ink, because I accidentally added distress ink refills to my distress oxide, and that's where you're going to see those little dots there. So that was a big mistake on my part. The ink still works fine, but I haven't been able to work out that distress oxide. So just be mindful when you are adding your ink refills that you add the correct ink to the correct pad. So just a little mistake on my part. Okay, so once I have my distress ink all over it's my oxide. Once I get my oxide all over my page, as you can see, that image is really showing up nicely now. So just the combination of the pumice stone and the black soot was a great combination. I was really happy with the background because I'm going for kind of a gothic look, and I think that the combination of the two works out great. So now I can go ahead and proceed in putting the card together. Now, I had to kind of stop a minute because I knew I wanted to use this background and I knew I wanted to do a resist, but I wasn't really sure what my design was going to be. And when I was going through my stash, I found this paper that kind of had a gargoyle towards the bottom. So I thought, oh man, that's perfect. I can go ahead and use that to create my gothic sort of Halloween card. So I went ahead and I trimmed down my paper, and I'm going to be making a 5x7 card. So typically the way that I figure out my measurements is by 1/4 of an inches. So if I have a 5x7 card, then I want my border to have some of that white border. So I'll typically trim it about 1/4 of an inch. And then for my layer, which is going to be my piece that I'm working on right now, which is what I embossed, that'll be 1/4 of an inch smaller than my black paper that I just showed you. So as I showed you in the beginning, the stamp isn't, square on the top. It does have kind of some curve to it. So I wanted to go ahead and mimic that curve. So I went ahead and I tore the paper just again to make it look more organic. I could have easily cut it, but I wanted the organic look. And I went ahead and I added some of my black soot to the edge just to cover up some of that white. And I went ahead and I took that black soot all the way around my edges. And then once I had the edges completely inked up with my black soot, I'm going to go ahead and adhere it to my black paper. And I'm going to use my 3-in-1 beacon to add this down. Now the paper that I started out with for my stamping or my distressing is a thicker paper. But you could easily just use regular cardstock. But I believe my paper was a little bit thicker. It probably was the paper that I typically use for the background of my card, because I wasn't really sure if I was going to be adding water or moisture to the card. But I was really happy with the way that the card held up after my embossing. So I'm going to go ahead and add my 3-in-1 beacon, and I'm going to adhere it to my paper. And then from here, we're going to go ahead and continue with the layering of the card. Now, like I said, my idea was to create sort of a Gothic theme, kind of like if someone was sitting inside of a church. And I found these two paper dolls, which I thought would be perfect, but I didn't want them floating in air, so I decided to make kind of like a little stone seat for them to sit on, kind of like if they were in a church and they had a stone seat that they can sit on. So that's kind of what I'm going for here. So just a reminder, when you are trimming down your cardstock or your paper, don't throw away your pieces, because you might be able to find a solution or a use for them, like I did on this here. That paper, that black paper that I'm adhering now, was part of my black background that I trimmed off, and I was able to go ahead and use that to kind of tie the background and the seat together. And then I'm going to come in with, again, another piece that I trimmed down from that white cardstock, where I added the pumice stone and the black soot, and I'm going to add that to the top so that way it looks like a true bench that they're sitting on. Now, one thing that I had to do when I actually created this is I had to make sure that the bench was aligned perfectly. So when my little characters were sitting down, it matched their bottoms. I wanted to make sure that it looks like they were sitting and that it wasn't awkward. So that's one thing you want to make sure, that when you are adding some sort of element or some sort of piece where you want to show them sitting, you may have to actually adjust it before you glue it down. And that's what is really nice about the liquid glue, is you're able to adjust your paper if you need to do that. So just make sure that you are kind of working with your paper dolls or whatever item you're using if you want them to be, in a certain position. Now, as you saw here, the piece that I'm cutting down, I didn't have quite enough for a full strip, but the characters that are going to be sitting on the card are going to be taking up the center portion. So I really didn't need to have pieces of cardstock that went completely across. I can just add 2 pieces to each side. And then when I glue down my paper dolls, it's going to cover the part that isn't quite covered in the middle. So a lot of times if you are looking for a specific design and you're going to have some layering, you can sometimes use that to your advantage if your pieces just aren't big enough. Okay, so I went ahead and I finished off the bench here by adding those 2 pieces just to make it look like, again, a bench that might be in a church for them to sit on. Now, the idea that I had for this is to kind of create a couple that might be sitting on a bench, perhaps after a funeral or in memory of some other deceased family members. Now, I know that sounds morbid, but again, I am making a Halloween card, so bear with me, guys. So what I decided to do is use some stickers from the Tim Holtz sticker collection and put some of those characters in the background. When I was going through some of my pieces here, I found the piece that said in memory of, I want to say, in memory of. So that's where I got the idea to kind of put it, create a card where it looks like some couple was just sitting and thinking about maybe their family or their ancestors. And that's kind of where the inspiration came behind that. So sometimes it just takes a little word chip just to get your complete inspiration going for a card. And the in memory of is what kind of tied it up for me. Now, a lot of times when I go into creating a card, I already have an idea of what kind of design or the design that I'm going to be creating. But a lot of times I don't. I knew for this particular card, I wanted to use that oversized stamp and I wanted it to be my background. And I knew I wanted it to be with that pumice stone and the black soot, but I wasn't really sure what my overall design was going to be. So sometimes when you're going along, it just kind of comes to you. And this could, your inspiration can be triggered by a word chip, like for instance, this one was a paper doll, or maybe just a little piece of ephemera. You never know where your inspiration is going to come. So even if you sit down and you want to use one of your stamp sets, if you don't exactly know what your design is going to be, sometimes it will just come to you as you're creating. So don't let that stop you if you don't have the entire design figured out. Just let your inspiration flow and just create for the sake of creating, because a lot of times, like I said, your inspiration will come to you as you walk down your path of creating. So with these stickers, as you can see, it didn't exactly stick perfectly on my background, and that's because I have that embossing the embossing ink and the embossing stamp on the background is kind of affecting the sticking of the sticker. So I'm going to go ahead and add some of my 3-in-1 beacon here, just to make sure my stickers will stick to my cardstock. And I'm going to do that for all 3 of my stickers. Those little stickers are small enough where I'm able to add 3 of the people. So the stickers in this Halloween sticker pack are perfect for a background. And that's what I decided to go ahead and use for the background for my couple that is sitting in memory of their family members. Okay, so once I get all 3 of my stickers added with my 3-in-1 beacon, then I'm going to come in with some of my Mod Podge. Now you can use Mod Podge, you can use Distress Collage Medium, anything that's going to be an adhesive, liquid adhesive that you can add over your images. So I just want to make sure that my images are nice and secure. I don't want those edges to curl up. And while I was pretty confident that the 3-in-1 beacon would be sufficient, I did want to make sure that I added some sort of Mod Podge or some sort of collage medium, just to make sure that those images were going to stay in place and they weren't going to go anywhere. Additionally, the Mod Podge that I use is kind of an antique tint. Has an antique tint to it, so it's really nice to add over some of your images, especially if you're going for a vintage look, which is typically what I'm always going for. So it's a nice addition. I was really excited when I actually found that Mod Podge. You can't find it in the stores. I've looked for it, but you are able to get it on Amazon. So I'll make sure that I do link it with all the other products below. So that way, if you do want to get it, you can add it to your crafting supply as well. It really was a good investment because I use it all the time, and it has that great antique color to add to your cards. All right, so enough of my sales pitch here. Once I was finished adding my collage medium, or my Mod Podge, I should say, then I went ahead and I took my 3-in-1 beacon and I added it to my In Memory of word chip, and I added it to the top. And then all I needed to do was to add my couple sitting on the bench. And I did want the couple to pop up just a little bit, so I am going to use my foam tape that will pop them up just a bit. Now, this foam tape was a really big roll, and I haven't used it recently because I don't know if you can tell, but it's really thick, so it's going to pop up your images quite a bit. For this one, I really didn't mind, but that's a lesson learned for me, that when I do go to buy foam tape, I want to make sure that I check out how thick it is, because typically I don't use foam tape that's this thick because it pops up images on my cards a little bit too much. But for this one, because I wanted it to look like they were, you know, far away from that background in a church perhaps, I wanted them to be popped up quite a bit. So this foam tape actually worked for me. All right, so once I had all of my foam tape all over my paper dolls, then all I needed to do was add them to my card. And then for the most part, my card was complete. All I needed to do was add my card base to my white cardstock to finish off the card. So I hope that you've enjoyed this card that I've created for you today. I know that the background stamp, which is one of the new Tim Holtz Halloween stamps, can be a little bit tricky. A lot of times you don't know what you're going to use it for, but it really is a great background. And don't think with your background stamps that you have to use the entire image. If, you know, perhaps your card just needs part of the image, be a little creative. You don't have to use the whole stamp, you guys. So just keep that in mind, that if you do see a background stamp and you love it, you don't necessarily have to use the whole thing. And I knew that going in, so I was really confident and comfortable purchasing this stamp. And even though you're only getting 2 stamps on this particular set, the stamps, like I said, are really well worth it, and I was happy with the purchase. So as always, I'll leave a list of all the products that I've used to create this card along with the links to the stores. And if you've enjoyed my video, I would certainly appreciate a thumbs up. I think I have a couple of more videos left to create for you for my Halloween series, and then I'm going to be doing my drawing probably around the 30th of the month. Now remember, if you want to be entered into my drawings, you do have to leave a comment below, and you do have to be subscribed to my channel. So go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you're not subscribed yet, and don't forget to hit that little bell so that way you are notified when my next video comes up. So that'll do it for this card. I hope that you've enjoyed it. I know that it's probably a little bit different than typically what I make, but again, it is a Halloween card. Not too creepy, I don't think. Just some fun using the in memory of and that wonderful background stamp from Tim Holtz. All right, everybody, thanks so much for stopping by, and we'll see you again next time.